Hello, everybody. You are here for harnessing the power of live music and driving traffic to your brewery, which kind of hits a little bit on the theme of which we didn't really talk about this morning was live music.
No,
but I know
it's funny. I was thinking the same thing. Like this is kind of part of the theme of delighting your customer.
Yeah, I know. Well, Kristen Luckenheimer, and I didn't get to the question, but she has live music all the time. But I'm personally super happy to have Dan Spears with us here once again. Dan has been a great friend to the New York State Brewers Association and BMI, and he also has been an incredible resource for helping breweries understand music licensing and why you should be licensing and all of those sort of things. And so, if you get those letters, which, none of you want to get about music licensing and things, and you're having issues, I usually refer you to Dan, and Dan can talk you through all of that sort of thing. And so, so we're super proud to have Dan and have you back this year. And so thanks for being here. And
thank you. Thank you for your friendship as well, and thank you for always giving me an opportunity to spend some time with your amazing membership. I know it's not the most exciting subject matter when we talk about music licensing, but I'll try and make it fun and interesting. I know there's a lot of other sessions that this competes with, so I appreciate you being here. We're gonna talk about a lot of things today, but I think the first thing that we're gonna focus on is the impact that music can have when customers are making decisions about where to spend their money, where to go, bars, restaurants, and in this case, breweries. So we'll talk about a survey that we did a couple of years ago that revealed some pretty interesting statistics. And then we'll get into that subject matter that's not everybody's favorite, as Paul alluded to, and that's music copyrights and what's licensable in your brewery, what isn't. Who are all those acronyms, those performing rights organizations, as we call them, that are reaching out to you as soon as they see on your social media pages that you have live music? They come out of the woodwork, and you're like, is this a scam? We're living in a world of scammers, and so I don't blame you for being concerned about whether they're legitimate or not. So we're going to arm you with a lot of knowledge so that at the end of the day, when you get those calls, you'll know who they are, and you'll be able to make a good determination as to whether you need to do business with them or not. We'll briefly talk about the current license that's in place that we have for breweries. If you are interested in pursuing a live music program, you need to take the steps to make sure that you're legal. And we will also talk a little bit about at the end, if you've never done live music before, I'll offer up a few tips on how to start that program. I mean, it's one thing to get excited about the concept, but it's another one to try and execute it. A lot of businesses, breweries like Treehouse, they have on staff entertainment bookers that's what they do. But the smaller breweries don't. And so you've got to figure out, how do I identify that talent that I can bring into my brewery? So we'll talk about that as well. But first of all, this survey that we did a couple of years ago revealed a lot of interesting things. And I'm not going to dive too deep into it. I'm going to highlight a little bit of it. It really revealed a lot of stuff that I think most people would already know, right? It's logic to think that people make decisions about where they're going to eat and where they're going to drink based upon the kind of music that's being offered there. Some of the highlights of this survey that I thought really hammered home that point is, 83% of all customers that were surveyed said they're more likely to return to a particular venue if there's live music. 93% said the right song has the power to change the mood or make their day. A large percentage said that they would go to a brewery, a bar, a restaurant if a table wasn't available, but the music was good, they'd stick around until that table was ready. 70% spend more money on food and drinks if there's live music. 80% of customers stay longer if there's live music. 87% say music is an important part of their daily routine. So, a lot of the things that this survey revealed, we kind of knew already, but it's nice to see that it was validated. I think it was 1,000 different consumers we reached out to. We also reached out to some businesses as well and asked them about how important music is to their operation. So if you're interested, these statistics are in one sheet that I have down here, and if you really want to dive into it, like I said, there's a lot of key findings on this. If you really want to dive into it and get really granular with it, it's all published on our website. But you can see, 42% often check a restaurant or bar website to see if they have live music playing. So 58% will buy more food or drinks just to hear more of the music. So again, I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but they're pretty validating when it comes to music being an important part of a business's model. Now, once you've decided that live music is important for you, it's a driver. Now you've got to figure out, well, okay, how can I do it legally? And this is the part of the presentation that you could potentially fall asleep in, but I'm going to try and help you avoid that and make it a little more interesting than perhaps it might be. What we do is all based upon copyright. The copyright law was created to protect that intangible, right? The intellectual property, whether it's your recipe for your double IPA, or it's a composition written by one of our songwriters, or it's a book written by an author. Those are all examples of works protected by the copyright law. When it comes to music, there's really 3 or 4 rights within the copyright law that are connected to music. We call it the bundle of music rights. And the first 2 I'm going to talk about probably don't have any relevance to your day-to-day operations, but I think it is kind of interesting to put all of these rights in context so you have an understanding of how the creators of music actually generate income to put food on the table for their families. The one all the way at the bottom is called the synchronization license. That comes into play if you're a music supervisor and you want to use music in a film that you're producing. You've got to get the rights to that commercial music by negotiating with the publisher and getting their permission and then determining a fair and equitable fee to be paid for the rights to have that music in the film. That would also apply to television shows. If you wanted to do a television commercial for your brewery on the local TV station in Albany, and you wanted to use a Crosby, Stills and Nash song in that commercial, you would need to clear what's called the synchronization right with the publisher. And the publisher's we can get into this in a minute, but the publisher actually owns the music. The songwriter in many cases doesn't own the music. They grant that right to a publisher. And the publisher serves as an agent for that song to try and get it into movies or films. Try and get it recorded by Tim McGraw, because that's when the revenue stream occurs for both the songwriter and the publisher, and they're splitting that revenue or those licensing fees / royalties 50-50. Second right is the right of reproduction. We call it commonly known as the mechanical royalty. That's when you buy a piece of music, whether it's physical copy through vinyl or you're digitally downloading it. About 9.1 cents per song goes to the publisher and the songwriter. It's not a lot of money now. It used to represent a lot of money to a songwriter because in the old days we bought albums. So if you have a song that was on a George Strait album, then you were guaranteed of making a lot of money because people were buying albums. Well, nobody buys albums anymore. It's a singles world. So that mechanical royalty that used to be a pretty important income stream for songwriters has kind of dried up. And so now they're much more dependent on the right at the very top of the slide, which is the public performance right, which is why I'm here and why we're talking about this subject matter, because that kicks in when music is played publicly in a restaurant or a bar or a brewery, and the songwriter is entitled to be compensated for that. And so all these performing rights organizations, which we'll talk about in a minute, represent that public performance right on behalf of songwriters. And this is how they make a living. Many of you that have been to Nashville know there's a community of songwriters that all they do every day is punch the time clock and try and write a hit song so that they can, again, to use that term, put food on the table for their family. This is their sole source of income. So BMI protects that right so that a songwriter can continue to compose music. So in a brewery, what is licensable? If you've got music, what exactly are my responsibilities? Well, certainly if you have a radio station that's a commercial station that's being broadcast into your brewery, that's licensable if you operate a facility that's more than 3,750 square feet. If you have a commercial radio station playing to your customers, but you have less than 3,750 square feet, there's an exemption in the copyright law that you do not have to pay licensing fees for that. But that's only for commercial radio. That's not related to live music or karaoke or DJs or anything of that nature. Certainly live music is yes?
Sorry, what about the streaming platforms?
Oh, well, I'm going to get to that in 30 seconds. No worries. You can ask questions as we go through this. Live music, of course, is probably the most obvious example of music that's licensable and needs to be licensed. DJs, also a licensable form of music. Karaoke, the same. Television sets. This is the most commonly misunderstood part of the copyright law. Wasn't my idea to write this in the copyright law. It was Congress's. But if you have a television set in your brewery, or several of them, and you've got the NFL Sunday ticket or whatever, and you've got it turned up, that audio is your responsibility to license. I know it sounds crazy. You think, oh, that should be DirecTV's responsibility. I have a commercial license with DirecTV or Infinity or Charter. But under the copyright law, any audio coming out of that television set, which there is music in audio, right? Halftime shows, there's music in commercials, episodic music and television shows, what have you. That's your responsibility. If you don't want to be responsible for that, turn the audio off. That's a great way to not be incurring any licensing fees. Now, to your question about streaming services, this kicks in to the commercial music service conversation. If the only music you have in your brewery is provided by a commercial music service, these are some examples, there's hundreds of them: Mood Media, Rockbot, Soundtrack Your Brand, Pandora for Business, Spotify for Business. If that's the only form of music you have at your brewery, no live music, no karaoke, nothing, then you are not responsible for paying any licensing fees to any performing rights organizations. Why? Because these commercial music services do it on your behalf. That's kind of part of their sales pitch too. They'll come in and say, hey, this has already been pre-licensed. You have no responsibility to get agreements with any other of these organizations. If you are doing that, if you have licenses with BMI, ASCAP, or CSAC, and you also have commercial music services, and that's the only form of music you have, drop those agreements with BMI, and ASCAP, and CSAC, because basically that's double paying. Now, if you're using your own personal account to stream music as background music at your particular brewery, then you do need license agreements with the performing rights organizations, because those are personal accounts, not meant for public performance commercially. So you would have to get a license agreement to allow for you to play your favorite playlist off of your personal account on one of these streaming services, Spotify, Pandora, Apple Music, what have you. Okay, just a little bit of information about, again, how this ecosystem works in the music industry. BMI would grant permission to businesses to publicly perform music. The songwriters and composers create that work, and as I mentioned before, it's the publishers that own it. And most people would say, well, why would a songwriter give up ownership of a song? Well, they do it quite often because a song isn't going to generate any income unless you have someone sort of representing that catalog and trying to get traction with that music. And so what happens is songwriters will give up ownership of that song in exchange for a publishing company to try and get some traction with their catalog. Again, it could be trying to get Keith Urban to record that new song that you've just written, or it might be trying to get that song placed in a television show. Publishers work as agents on behalf of songwriters and their catalogs. So this is, at BMI, we used to call it the circle of life until we realized it's actually a square. This is a square of life. This is kind of how the whole system works. If you're a songwriter, you affiliate with a performing rights organization like BMI at the beginning of your career. Why? Because these organizations were created to protect your works. It would make no sense for you not to affiliate. It's free, and so songwriters are usually advised early on by someone in their camp, whether it's a professor at their music school or if they have a manager early in their career, they say join a performing rights organization, because these groups were created 100% to make sure that your rights are protected. So a songwriter joins BMI. I listed a lot of names here that you've all heard of because they're performing songwriters. They have a career other than writing songs. They're entertainers, they're on the road, they're making a lot of money through tours and merch. So I hate even putting those examples up, because then you think to yourself, well, I'm just paying fees so that these guys can get richer. But to be honest with you, most of the songwriters that we represent and most of the songwriters that are dependent upon those licensing fees you pay, you've never heard of them. They're behind the scenes. All they do is write songs. I've put their names up there. They would mean nothing to you. So that's why I threw a little sizzle in there and mentioned some performing songwriters that BMI represents. So songwriter joins BMI. We represent their catalogs, and we go out to restaurants, bars, breweries, radio stations, fitness clubs, television stations, and we license that music. We grant them the right to use the catalog of music that we represent, whether it's Lady Gaga's or Taylor Swift's or what have you. So by signing a license, you have blanket access to the entire BMI catalog. And we track those performances through a variety of means. Probably the most important is the Shazam technology we use. We have listening stations in all major markets, so we can track how many spins a song has on the radio. We use a lot of other data too through Polestar and other information to determine how often a song is played, where it's played, and then we send out a quarterly statement to our songwriters every quarter that tells you, here's where your songs were played. You had these amount of streams on Pandora, this amount of spins on radio stations, you've had this amount of performances internationally, and so you can understand where that money came from when you look at your check. We also have reciprocal agreements with international societies. This is important to mention only because I know sometimes breweries will have a Cinco de Mayo party or a St. Paddy's party, and they're playing Irish music or Mexican music, and they're concerned about whether it's licensed or not. If you have an agreement with BMI, ASCAP, we have reciprocal agreements with these international societies so that music is 100% licensed, which means when Taylor Swift song is played in Tokyo, Japan, the equivalent of BMI they're called Jazz Rack, they're tracking those performances, they're collecting those licensing fees, they're paying BMI, and then we pay Taylor Swift. And vice versa, when an Irish songwriter's music is played on St. Paddy's Day in a bar or restaurant, we're collecting those licensing fees, paying it to the Irish Performing Rights Organization so they can pay their songwriters. All right, here to me is the most important part of the presentation. You got to get a better understanding of who all these people are, because you're getting inundated, sometimes harassed, which I'm not proud of. In our industry, we have a reputation for being very aggressive, and sometimes to the point it's harassment, and I apologize if you've experienced that. Let's start with the two biggest performing rights organizations, because between ASCAP and BMI, we're talking about 90% of all music that's being played in your brewery or on the radio stations that you listen to or what have you. ASCAP was the first performing rights organization to be created in the United States. This was in 1914. The biggest consumers of music back in 1914 were radio stations. They had a lot of live performances in the studio, orchestral stuff, and so ASCAP was created to make sure that those songwriters were fairly protected and fees were collected and royalties were paid out. Now, the problem when you have one organization, one company doing business in a space, they start engaging in monopolistic behavior. And the radio industry was seeing their fees go up by 100% on a yearly basis. So the radio industry said, we need to do something about this. We need to create a competitive music source to bring those fees down. So they got together and they sold shares of stock to their fellow radio stations to get the seed money to create BMI. That's why it was called Broadcast Music, Inc., and that was created in 1939. So it was created to knock out the monopolistic behavior that ASCAP was exhibiting at the time, but also, if any of you are big American music history buffs, during that time there was an influx of music from Appalachia, which is kind of the foundation for almost all the music we hear today, whether it's rock or country. It really has its roots in Appalachia. Well, with this new influx of music from Appalachia coming in, ASCAP had a very strict policy on who could join their organization. You had to have at least 2 established hits on the radio to be a member of ASCAP. Well, these new forms of music, this Appalachian music, these songwriters, artists, didn't have any traction on the radio, so they couldn't join ASCAP. Radio would not play these artists because there was no copyright compliance mechanism in place so they could legally play it. So BMI said, well, not only are we going to create this new company to bring the rates down, we're going to open up the doors to these new forms of music. We're not going to put any requirements on having, you have to have a couple of hits on the radio first before you can join. Anyone can join. So BMI's open door policy is really what led to the explosion of music on the American scene during that time. Rock and roll was really kicking in. That's why Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters and Little Richard are all BMI songwriters, because of that history and that open door policy. So BMI and ASCAP, 90% of all music out there. BMI and ASCAP operate under Justice Department consent decrees. Why? Because of what I mentioned earlier, when there's just a few players in the space, Justice Department steps in and says, we need to monitor their behavior for antitrust purposes. There's a lot of elements in that consent decree, but there's only one thing that has any relevance to you, and that is we are required by law to treat similarly situated businesses in a similar fashion. So any license agreement we offer to Treehouse has to be the same license agreement offered to Upward Brewing. The methodology has to be the same, all the terms have to be the same, and so you cannot negotiate fees with BMI or ASCAP. We are prohibited by law from doing that. So when you get a rate quote from BMI or ASCAP, you can take that to the bank, that it's based upon a methodology that is identical to all of your competitors, counterparts in the business. That's BMI and ASCAP. Now, this is where it gets a little more interesting. CSAC, much, much smaller, probably represents 3, 4, 5% of the music out there, but they do have some fairly high profile songwriters that they represent. They represent Green Day, several others. So it's conceivably difficult to offer music in your tap room without probably having a conversation with CSAC. CSAC is a private corporation. They do not operate under a consent decree. They can be very aggressive in their pricing. So I mentioned the consent decree element because CSAC is a company you can negotiate with. So if they come in at you with a fee quote that's identical to what you're paying BMI and ASCAP, I would push back. I would say, I want to pay a fee that's commensurate with the music that I'm using, and I know for a fact that BMI and ASCAP have about 90% of the music out there, and you've got about 3 or 4%. So your fee needs to reflect your market share. There's a fourth performing rights organization that was created in 2013. My guess is most of you have not heard from them. It was created by Irving Azoff, the former manager of the Eagles, music industry executive, very, very successful. He said, I'm going to create a new performing rights organization with a catalog that businesses cannot do without, and I'm going to price it accordingly. So he stole Bruce Springsteen, Bruno Mars from ASCAP, brought in Pharrell Williams. It's got a pretty high-profile roster of songwriters, and they also are very aggressive in their pricing. But they, again, are only about 3 or 4% of music out there. So if Global Music Rights comes calling and they're aggressive in their pricing, you do the same thing. Don't ignore either one of these guys, because they will be litigious if you do. Just have conversation, continue the dialogue, but don't settle for a fee that's similar to ASCAP and BMI. You can talk to Fred Matt about this. He was harassed by CSAC for a while, and I was trying to advise him on the best way to handle it, because I told him you shouldn't be paying the same fees to BMI to CSAC as you pay to BMI and ASCAP. Global Music Rights, I don't know how aggressive they are in some of the smaller breweries. I think they're mostly going after larger brands, but I just want to keep you abreast of who they are if they do reach out. They are legitimate, so have a conversation with them. You know, it's possible that you can do without a license with Global Music Rights. It's possible you can do without a music license with CSAC, but you'd have to be very careful in monitoring your music use. BMI and ASCAP both have databases that can tell you exactly who wrote the song, who published it, so you know what you're paying for. CSAC has a searchable database as well. I believe Global Music Rights does too. So if you want to sign somebody in your company to be responsible for checking all the set lists and make sure that they only have, for example, ASCAP and BMI works. You could do it, but my guess is you're in the business of selling beer and not monitoring your music. So a lot of these businesses just take agreements with BMI and ASCAP and CSAC just so they don't have to worry about it. I mentioned this fifth organization, which has become a real disruptor and a real problem, not only for customers, but for folks like me who are in the business of trying to educate and help you all understand what is a very confusing business. All-Track really only represents independent creators and publishers. They don't have a lot of commercially viable music in their catalog. But they're still going out to breweries, restaurants, hotels and saying, you've got live music, you need a license with us, or you can be sued for infringement. Well, most business owners hear the word copyright infringement, get concerned, rightfully so, sign a license, pay the money, when in reality they're not using any music that All-Track represents. All-Track is taking advantage of the fear and lack of education in the industry to get licenses. So I just make you aware of them. If you hear from All-Track, it's very simple. Say, hey, you know what? I believe in compensating songwriters, but I'm not sure we're using your product. Send me a list of the top 10 or 15 songs that are being played on radio right now that are represented by All-Track. And you'll find that they won't. It's smoke and mirrors. They don't really have much there. Yes?
Just so I'm clear, so you're saying that Pandora is part of their agreement, doesn't apply to these organizations? We're just talking about live music? Or?
If you have Pandora for business,
Yeah.
and you have no other music,
Yeah.
you don't have karaoke, you're not using music during a trivia contest, you've got no DJs, you've got no live music, and you just have Pandora for business, then none of this applies to you. Because all these organizations are being paid by Pandora already on your behalf. So the benefits, it says BMI music license, but the benefits of doing business with any of these performing rights organizations is that you have blanket access to their catalog. You know, a lot of people that are angry and push back and don't like to pay fees, which I understand. You've got a lot of people tugging at you, licensing responsibilities. But if BMI or ASCAP or CSAC didn't exist, the copyright law still would. And you'd have to go and license all of these songs individually with each songwriter and publisher. So the benefit of a performing rights organization like BMI and why we were created, it's a very simple way to gain access to all these songs. You know, over 20 million songs, more than 1.3 million songwriters, so that you can use as much or as little music from the BMI or ASCAP or CSAC catalogs as you would like. And in doing so, you know, I always think it's important to mention is that when you pay these licensing fees, yes, you're complying with the copyright law, but you're also supporting the craft of songwriting. You know, without your support, without you believing in live music, paying those licensing fees, the songwriters aren't going to have the income they need to actually continue to write music. And who doesn't want new music to be created? And you all are an important part of that ecosystem. So thank you for those that are paying fees. Please understand that the money's going to the right place. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is how the agreements are set up with BMI, and it's pretty much the same with ASCAP as well. You sign a license. There's a report form where you check all the different forms of music that you've got, how often you've got the music, and then you report your occupancy number, your fire code number, because that's the basis for your fee. For us, it's kind of the great equalizer. If you're a large nightclub, and you can put a lot of bodies in there, a lot more ears can hear the music, you're going to pay a much larger fee than if you're a small tap room with 50 people. Your occupancy code is, your fire code number is 50 people. You're paying a minimum fee to BMI, which is probably in the vicinity of $400 a year. If you've got dancing, cover charges, those fees can increase. But for the most part, the average fee for a small tap room is around 400 and something bucks a year. And that's pretty similar for ASCAP. So add a couple $100 from CSAC. If you're starting a live music program, you can expect to pay performing rights fees of around $1,000 plus a year.
Okay, question.
Yes.
I have maybe 25 times during the summer, maybe less, 15 performers are, right? I just look, both ASCAP and both of them I'm paying over $700 for. So how do they do that? I mean, it's, I have occupancy of 99 people. So just.
Okay, you have occupancy of 99.
All right.
You're paying ASCAP and BMI around seven.
BMI is less.
Okay.
But ASCAP and CSAC,
Yeah.
both around $700.
Okay. Well, the CSAC you shouldn't be paying $700. Again, this is them just taking advantage of you and being aggressive in their pricing. BMI. I mean, if you have only a 99-person fire code, and you have what? How many performances a week? How often live music during the week?
Oh, it's only during the summer.
I'll give you my card. That doesn't sound right to me. You should be paying a minimum fee. I'm not sure where the 700 and something comes from.
Yeah.
I'd have to dig into it a little bit, but if you come get my card afterwards, we'll look into it and make sure that you're being.
Because I could have about almost $2,300 a year on those three.
Yeah, that seems like a lot for someone with a small tap room like that. Unless are you doing any concerts outside of your, like outside?
We have an outside area, but it's both, either it's inside or outside. It's both 99 places with pavilion outside.
If we'll,
Stream music.
We have business stream music.
Oh.
we'll exchange information. I'll see if I can help and figure out why you're being billed that amount of money. Also, you should know if you're a member of the BA, you can get up to 20% savings on your BMI fees. It's 5% for just being a member of the BA, 5% for paying online, and there's a timely pay discount as well. So if you aren't taking advantage of this, you should. Again, let me know if you're a brewery that's paying BMI and you don't think you're getting the BA discount. I can help you with that. I'm going to run through this very quickly because I hate this slide because it's not fun to report this information, but I only mention it because if you hear from these performing rights organizations, don't ignore them, because you can get in some hot water, and these performing rights organizations can be very aggressive as I mentioned, and you can be held accountable individually when it comes to a copyright infringement case. So just engage with these people and take care of licensing. This is what I was alluding to earlier. 85 cents of every dollar you pay BMI goes to the songwriters. So in essence, you truly are an important part of the creation of music. They can't continue to write songs if they're not getting licensing fees and having an income for their family. So thank you for all of you that do pay licensing fees, because you're making a difference. Every cent counts for some of these writers. It's not easy being a songwriter. You can write a hit tomorrow and then not write another hit for 10 years. So it's a tough business, and this ecosystem that exists where you're a big part of it allows them to continue to write songs. I mentioned this program that we have only because I think it's important for you to know about it. Because if you pay BMI, and let's say you're paying BMI, to your point, $700 a year, and you have singer-songwriters in there a couple of times a week, and sometimes they're playing cover songs, but sometimes they're playing their own material. If they're a BMI songwriter or ASCAP or CSAC, because all three of us have a similar program, we have a program whereby you can report your original music that you've performed as a songwriter to us and get paid for those original songs that you're performing. And why would we have this in place? Why would we have this system? Well, because the way that we pay out the royalties to our writers, much of it is based upon data that we collect from the radio industry. I told you about the Shazam technology where we have listening stations. We are not at a point technologically where we can monitor music in every bar, restaurant, brewery, pub, tavern in the United States. So instead what we do is we use that radio data to pay out the royalties from the licensing fees that you all pay. So that covers the cover songs, right? That covers if they're playing a Taylor Swift cover or a Lady Gaga cover. But what if they're playing their own original that has never gotten any commercial radio airplay? Well, that was the hole in our system. So about 10 years ago, we fixed that by creating BMI Live, whereby local singer-songwriters, anytime they play in a licensed venue, they upload their set list of original songs, We take the fees that you pay us and we pay them out of that kitty so that they're being compensated for their original songs, which they wouldn't have gotten because of the radio data that we use to determine how to pay out those royalties. For those starting live music programs for the first time, I just want to mention there's a variety of online booking companies that help you find local artists or bands to perform in your market. We developed a partnership during COVID with a company called Gigmore because we think they do a very good job. It's kind of like the equivalent of Match.com for venues and artists. So if you're like, I want to get an R&B band for a party I'm doing Saturday night at my brewery, and I'm in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I have no idea what kind of talent is in Poughkeepsie, New York, you go into Gigmore, you register as a venue, you search what R&B bands are available in the Poughkeepsie market. Bands and artists can make a decision how far they want to travel. So you could put a radius of 100 miles, and you might pick up a songwriter or an artist from a market that's 100 miles away, but they're willing to come and play in your particular venue. So you're matched with the appropriate band or song or artist, and you negotiate a fee, and you're off to the races. They do a pretty good job at Gigmore. There's a couple of others that, more than a couple. There's Gig Salad. There's others that do it, but we did a lot of due diligence, and we found that Gigmore does a really good job of connecting venues to performing artists. So I got through this as quickly as I could because normally there's a lot of questions, and so that's the time for you all to ask them. Yes?
Just walk me through the legality of the 3,700 square feet.
Yeah, so under the copyright law, let's see if it's in here. I have one sheet here. I don't think it's in here. If you're playing your favorite local rock station in your brewery, instead of a commercial music service, instead of Pandora, you are using the local commercial station in Albany, and you're piping it into your facility. Under the copyright law, there's actually a paragraph in the copyright law that, again, I can send around if anybody's interested. It basically says if you have a facility with less than 3,750 square feet, and all you're doing is playing a commercial radio station in your business, you're exempt from paying any licensing fees. So if you're...
That's just a taproom space?
Yes, so...
Outside is different?
Well, yeah. I mean, yes. If cumulatively it's less than 3,750. Now, that doesn't include, if you've got a radio on in your production facility that your brewers are listening to, that's not public performance. And I usually mention that in my presentation as well. If you are, I know a lot of breweries use their space for weddings and corporate events. If you have music in those particular special events, that's considered a private performance. You do not need a license for it. So if you don't have any music at all, normally for your customers, but you only have it during these private events, then that does not require you to take a license for that. It's like weddings. It's like having an artist come and sing in the backyard for a few of your friends. That's considered a private performance. It would not be licensable. Sure. Anybody else?
Good question. Is there any differentiation? Is it over the air, like FM radio for that
Yes.
exception? So it's okay to play a community radio station, it does not have to be a for-profit radio station?
Correct.
Okay.
Any over-the-air radio station is covered. What wouldn't be covered would be like Sirius, XM, streaming. That would be something you'd have to license. This is a question that I get a lot, and I think I alluded to it earlier. Do I need licenses with all these organizations? Definitely BMI and ASCAP, because that's the lion's share of the music. Good chance of CSAC, Global Music Rights, maybe. But again, if you really don't have to worry about that sort of thing, you take licenses with BMI, ASCAP, and CSAC. If you're concerned about your costs and you really want to monitor your expenses, and you have someone on staff that doesn't mind asking the bands and song artists to provide set lists so that you can examine whether they're playing BMI, ASCAP, or CSAC songs, you could do that. There are some businesses I know that have chosen to make that a responsibility of one of their employees, but that's hard to do when you're a small staff and you're trying to sell beer, not monitor music use. If you're a songwriter, you can only affiliate with one organization. So when you're first getting started, you make that conscious decision which one is the best fit for you. You can't be a member of all three. And so, BMI represents the largest catalog in the world, really. But I would say ASCAP and BMI are the two companies you really need to do business with for sure. Yes?
Is there a time limit? Let's say you're making a reel, the time limit amount of music you can use on that, like 13 seconds of somebody's song?
Yeah, that's a urban myth.
All right, that's right.
They call that a needle drop, years ago. No, any piece of music at any time needs to be licensed. It's like if you were doing a commercial and you only used 10 seconds of a song, it still requires you to get the permission from the songwriter and publisher to use that 10 seconds. Yeah, that's a myth. A lot of people say, oh, if I only use 2 seconds or 3 seconds or 8 seconds, it's not licensable. No, any bits of music that you're using in any way requires permission from the publisher. Yes.
So my wife does our Instagram account. She's constantly tagging music. Is that covered?
Yeah. So all the social media platforms have licenses with BMI. So if you're doing a Facebook Live event where there's music, Facebook has a license for that. Instagram has a license. So that's not your responsibility. Same with YouTube. If you're posting any videos on YouTube that have a live singer-songwriter performing on YouTube or something from your bar or your brewery, YouTube has a license with BMI.
And so I guess the follow-on to that is when she picks a song and then they disallow it, it must be a music service that they did not license.
Well, so she's using a song. So this goes back to my original description of the different rights. So when music is synced with video, like on Instagram, like when you're posting a video of something that happened at your brewery, and then she picks one of the songs that Instagram offers. All those synchronization rights have been cleared with the particular publishers of those songs. So when you're using music in a video that's being streamed on Instagram, there are two rights that kick in. One is the synchronization right, which is the right to sync that music with the video. That's where your wife has gotten shot down because she's tried to get another song to use to sync, and Instagram have not cleared the synchronization right. Then when it's actually airing, that's the public performance right that Instagram also has cleared on your behalf with BMI, ASCAP, and CSAC. So yeah, to kind of give you a better understanding of it in a sort of a more generalized way, if I'm the producer of a television show and I want to use a particular song in an upcoming show in the series of this television show, not only do I need to get the synchronization right cleared, but then I need to make sure that the TV station, which is playing that television show, has a BMI license in place, which they all do anyways. But I'm saying there's two rights that play a role. Yes?
Is this similar to if you're watching like a rerun on Netflix? Some of the music is different than the original airing show. Is that synchronization?
So you're watching a rerun on Netflix, a streamed...
Like Wonder Years does not have the Joe Cocker version of... They've got some terrible version.
Yes.
So Wonder Years.
Yes, yeah. That's exactly what that is.
Synchronization.
Yeah, exactly. That's why, for example, television has been such a great platform, or cable or streaming service, such a great platform for new bands to get exposure. Because if I'm producing a Netflix television show and I don't have the budget to get a Joe Cocker song, I'll try and find an up-and-coming artist that replicates the Joe Cocker song, and that up-and-coming artist is willing to accept just a little bit of money in exchange for the exposure they're going to get. I mean, how many bands have been introduced to all of us through television and cable and that sort of stuff? So it's kind of a trade, right? It's like, we'll put you in this television show, but you can't charge me a lot for sync rights because I'm going to give you exposure. Your band's going to have more viewers, listeners than they've ever had before.
How does one, can you walk me through the process of reviewing your agreement with BMI? Like how does, like if it predates my time managing this, do I just email or how
Oh, you mean the license that's currently in place,
how do they see?
wanting to know whether it's accurate or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can reach out to us. I mean, there's an 800 number. I'll give you my card. You can reach out to me, and we can pull up that contract. It's stored in our archives. We have copies of it that show you. I mean, as I said, the agreement itself is very boilerplate, but then there's a little report form at the end that someone has filled out that says, we have music 2 times a week. We have karaoke. We have DJs. And if, for example, you stopped some of those things or reduced the amount of music use, then your fee would go down. So it is worth looking at. Yeah.
Who decides what the rates are and how often do they change?
So the rates over the years, the way that we've determined the fees over the years have been calculated in conversations with industry groups like the National Restaurant Association and others. For a long time, forever, the radio industry has paid BMI on a percentage of revenue basis. And that's great in one sense, because if you bill $1 million, then you pay a fee that's commensurate with billing $1 million. But if you're a small station and you're only billing $100,000, then you're paying a lot less. So it's kind of an equalizer. But the problem is that because you're reporting your revenue to us, much like the IRS, I hate to say this, but we have an audit team that looks into, oh gosh, that seems like they underreported their revenue. What we heard from the hospitality industry was we don't want people coming in and looking at our books. So let's come up with a way to do it that is more, that's less intrusive. And so that's where the fire code number came from. It's like, that's published everywhere. It's a very consistent number. Sometimes we get complaints because your fire code number might be 300 and you say, well, only 50 people come in. Well, that's the downside, but the upside is that it's a consistent number that everybody has to pay. So it was a sort of an amalgamation of conversations. We had a lot of industry leaders about what worked best. And so we haven't really changed our fee structure in a long, long time. It is what it is.
Can you expand a little bit on GMR and what they're doing? And because, like, if I buy a record these days at a record show, it's going to say, because correct me if I'm wrong, Prince is GMR, correct?
He is now.
He is now. So
his estate is now.
But it's always said it has to get BMI or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, what's like?
Yeah, I mean, you're right about that. People can switch affiliations. GMR, as I said, they stole a lot of songwriters from ASCAP with the promise of paying them a ton of money. And Prince's estate is an example of that. Springsteen is an example I mentioned before. I don't know if GMR is going to be around in 5 years. I think they were created to try and build up this catalog and revenue stream and then sell it. Have you heard from GMR? Have they?
No, but I've got a background in the music industry, so
Okay.
I'm aware of them and what they're doing.
Yeah.
I've seen that they're buying these catalogs, and it's like, well, they're coming from ASCAP. I
Yeah.
presume some are coming from BMI
Yeah.
and some from CSAC.
Yes.
And so that just creates a fourth one, and it's like, where does that stop? And so,
Well, that's the big, obviously that's what everybody comes to me with is like, where does that stop? All I can say, it's not easy to start a performing rights organization. I mean, you have to have a lot of stuff in place to be able to track the music use, distribute it. That's why this all track is personally very offensive to me, because they don't really have anything, but they're operating with this smoke and mirrors approach. They go to a local brewery and say, well, you have live music. You need a license with us, so you'll be sued for infringement. And people just say, okay, I don't want to be sued for infringement, when in reality they're not using any of their music. So I hear what you're saying, and that is a big question. They're like, when is it going to stop? 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't know if there's going to be any more in the offing. I think it's very, very difficult.
Well, personally for me, that Irving Azoff that's involved is already kind of sketchy, so.
I know. I know. Yes.
I just want to share this because this is mind-boggling. I asked my wife just now, what are we paying? BMI, we're paying $410.
Okay, that's the minimum fee.
ASCAP, $376.
Yeah.
CSAC, $666.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yes.
This is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about.
You're screwing us.
They are. And I don't mind saying it. They're in the same business that we are, so I can't disparage their mission. Their mission is to protect their songwriters. But to come to you, and charge you almost double what you're paying BMI and ASCAP, it's offensive to me because their catalog is minuscule compared to ASCAP and BMI. So
But they have,
Let's make a phone call.
They do? They have Bob Dylan, they have Neil Diamond.
so that means that nobody can play about this one unless you have a CSAC.
True. That's true. But you should be paying something that's commensurate with their catalog.
1.6 for 110.
Yes, and I would, for me, and I had a small operation where every buck counted, I'd reach out to CSAC and I would say, here's what I'm paying ASCAP, send them copies of the bill, here's what I'm paying ASCAP, here's what I'm paying BMI. I'm not paying you $600 something. That's ridiculous. I know your catalog is just minuscule compared to those other two. But they don't have a consent decree, so they kind of go off half-cocked and do whatever they want to do. And it's wrong, and it's partially why this industry has got a bad reputation. Because of that sort of thing. You feel like you've been taken advantage of, and you have been. And I'm sorry to hear that.
Me too, I think we should.
Out of curiosity, so out of zero more curiosity doing music, when we have the publishing, I was curious if the actual artist is the one playing it, is that still, they're being paid by you to do that as well?
Yes, so now you're saying if Amos Lee comes and plays, and he's a BMI affiliated songwriter, you're paying him, but you're paying him as an artist.
Right.
You're not paying him as a songwriter.
Right. Okay.
So he's getting paid as a songwriter and as an artist. So if he were just a cover band,
Right.
a cover artist, then he wouldn't, of course, be being paid by BMI. But when someone comes in, like an Amos Lee, who is a singer-songwriter and writes all of his own music, he's getting paid to perform live as an artist, as a musician, as an entertainer, and then he's getting compensated as a songwriter through BMI. So that's why I try and express to people when they say, I just paid $500 for this band on Saturday night. Why am I having to pay you guys? Well, it's a whole different thing. You're paying that band as an entertainment component, and you're paying BMI for the songwriting piece of it. And here's one thing that's kind of a fun fact that I hate to bring it up because a lot of people disagree with it, and I can understand why, but it's the way the copyright law was written. If you have a cover band that's playing on Saturday night, they're a tribute band, let's say. They're a John Mellencamp tribute band. That band bears no responsibility to pay John Mellencamp anything. It's the venue from which the music emanates from that bears that responsibility. And that's just part of the copyright law, and that is something over the years I've thought is probably not particularly fair. Yeah, I mean, why should that band, who's made a living off of John Mellencamp's music, why shouldn't they have to compensate John Mellencamp for that? But that's just not the way the law has been written, so. Anyone else? Well, look, thanks for coming. I know there's a lot of other stuff going on. If you need my card, you want to talk about something offline that you're dealing with, you can always use me as a resource. As Paul said, I'm not just here representing BMI. I'm representing the industry of music licensing and performing rights. So if you're having trouble with CSAC or GMR, you need advice how to deal with any of those folks, I consider myself sort of a consultant to the association to help you guys through any of this difficult stuff. So thanks for being here. And I have some for if you want. Now, a few of these